elder Atinga arrived in Ironhaven, carrying the Tindana Circle's judgment against Samini in a sealed communion vessel. A sphere of petrified heartwood, ancient and sacred, containing formal charges inscribed in root line frequency. The charges were comprehensive: unauthorized contact with the forbidden grove of Sunyani, unauthorized use of the root road, unauthorized exposure of an apprentice to depths exceeding safety protocols, and conspiracy with non-Tindana persons to interfere with systems under the Circle's exclusive jurisdiction. Every charge was accurate. Samini did not intend to contest any of them. Atinga was 73 years old. She had served on the Circle's governing council for 30 of those years, ascending through a tradition that valued caution above all other virtues. She had voted in favor of Nyariga's exile. She had voted for the deep communion prohibition. She had voted for the Sunyani contact ban, every vote cast in good faith, from a conviction that the Circle's authority depended on maintaining boundaries around what the Tindana were permitted to know. She wore her traveling cloth wrapped tight around narrow shoulders, the fabric darkened with road dust and the sweat of 2 days walking. Her sandals were cracked at the heel. She had not delegated this journey because the charges were too serious for delegation. She found Samini in the old quarter courtyard, sitting beside WuDon, both of them with palms against the earth in the casual communion posture that the Circle's protocols would have classified as unauthorized depth contact. They were not just listening to the root lines. They were conversing with them. The root lines responded with bidirectional communication, a system with a conscious presence below and a willing interlocutor above. The courtyard smelled of tamarind and laterite dust, and the faint sweetness of dawadawa pods drying on the wall beside the kitchen entrance. A rooster scratched in the shade of the neem tree, its claws leaving shallow furrows in the packed earth. The morning was already warm, the harmattan gone, the air thick with the humidity that preceded the first rains, and WuDon could feel the moisture gathering in the southern sky through the root line network, the system reading the approaching season, the way a body reads the approach of sleep. Samini. Atinga's voice carried the formal register of a Circle elder delivering institutional judgment. She held the sealed vessel before her, petrified heartwood polished by centuries of hands, the wood dark and dense with accumulated authority. I carry the Circle's judgment.
I know.
He did not stand, did not remove his palms from the earth, did not adopt the submissive posture protocol required when receiving charges from a superior elder.
Read the charges, Atinga, and then put your hands on the earth.
The elder's face tightened, the deep lines around her mouth compressing, her jaw setting with the rigidity of a woman whose authority had never been challenged by a sitting subordinate. Impertinent. A charged member did not direct an elder, but Atinga had survived 30 years of institutional politics by knowing when impertinence was calculated and when it was genuine. Samini was not defying the Circle. He was inviting it. She read the charges, each spoken in the formal cadence of Circle jurisprudence, the root line frequencies in the sealed vessel resonating through the morning air like the vibration of a struck bell. Unauthorized contact, unauthorized transmission, unauthorized depth exposure, conspiracy, each carrying prescribed penalties: decertification, censure, supervised restriction, permanent exile. WuDon listened, half-listened. The muffled hearing from the convergence turned Atinga's formal cadence into something partial, words arriving with their consonants blurred, their vowels smeared, the careful diction of Circle protocol reduced to a melody she could follow but could not fully parse. She read the elder's lips to fill the gaps. The movement of Atinga's mouth was precise, controlled, each word formed with the deliberation of someone who had spent decades using language as an instrument of institutional power. Through the floor, WuDon felt what she could not hear. The vibration of Atinga's voice traveling through packed laterite, through the root line junction beneath the courtyard, arriving at WuDon's palms as physical sensation. The consonants that her damaged ears could not distinguish, her communion registered as tremors in the earth. She was hearing the elder through the ground.
I do not contest any charge, Samini said. Every allegation is accurate. I contacted Sunyani. I used the root road. I took WuDon deeper than any apprentice in recorded history. I conspired with an exile, a shadow binder, a pattern keeper, a marginal candidate, and the earth bonded to interfere with the enskinment, the encoding network, and the root line architecture.
Then you accept the penalties.
I accept the charges. I reject the premise that the rules I broke were protecting anything worth protecting.
He finally looked at her, tired, honest. The skin around his eyes creased with the weariness of a man who had not slept properly since the convergence, and who carried, in the set of his shoulders and the loose grip on his petrified staff, the particular exhaustion of someone who has won a battle, and discovered that victory is heavier than defeat.
The rules were protecting the circle's institutional comfort, not the root lines, not the groves, not the zagale. The circle was protecting itself from the truth that the beings who built the communion tradition are alive beneath our feet and have been screaming for us to hear them.
Attinga's grip on the vessel tightened until her knuckles blanched against the dark wood. The institutional authority she had carried across 2 days of hard travel, 30 years of careful protocol, a lifetime of measured decisions, concentrated in the pressure of her fingers against petrified heartwood. The circle did not authorize me to receive new information, she said sharply. The circle authorized me to deliver judgment.
And when has the circle ever authorized anything that mattered?
WuDon's voice was quiet, respectful, but it carried a resonance that made Attinga's trained ear flinch, a harmonic depth that should not have existed in an apprentice, a frequency WuDon's voice produced because her body had been rebuilt by the convergence's passage, and the sound of her speech now carried echoes of the deep communion the way a cave carries echoes of water.
The prohibition against deep communion, the exile of Nyariga, the Sunyani ban, every decision that kept the circle safe and the root lines sick, authorized properly through proper process with proper votes. And every one of them was wrong.
You are an apprentice, you do not.
I heard the world scream, Elder.
WuDon's palms did not leave the earth. She felt the root lines pulse beneath her, not dramatic, not surging, just the steady beat of a healthy system carrying signal. The pulse traveled through packed laterite to reach Attinga's feet, and the elder felt it through her sandals, through the cracked leather, through the channels that 50 years of practice had carved into her nervous system. A signal so clean it burned.
I felt the silence when the groves went dark. I traveled the root road to the guardian's chamber and bargained for a fruit that saved the communion network. The circle did not authorize any of it. The circle would have prohibited every step, and the root lines would be dead.
The courtyard was quiet. The rooster had stopped scratching, its head cocked at an angle that suggested even poultry could read the tension in a room. The morning heat pressed in, drawing the scent of tamarind sap and warm dust from every surface. The neem tree's leaves hung motionless in air that had forgotten how to move. Attinga looked at the two of them. Master and apprentice, palms on earth, connected to a communion the circle had never permitted. Her rage was real. It sat behind her ribs like a hot stone, the institutional fury of a woman whose life's work was being dismissed by a man who had broken every rule she had spent 30 years enforcing. Her authority was real, but the root lines beneath her feet were singing. And Attinga, beneath the loyalty, beneath the protocol, beneath the decades of caution, was a Tindana, a listener. Before she was an elder, before she was a council member, before she was the circle's chosen instrument of judgment, she was a woman who had learned to hear the earth speak and had dedicated her life to the hearing. And the earth was saying something she had never heard it say before. She looked at the vessel, the sealed charges, the authority. She looked at the earth. She set the vessel down. The petrified heartwood met the packed laterite with a dull sound, ancient wood on ancient ground, two old things touching. She knelt. The packed laterite was warm against her knees, rough through the thin cloth of her wrapper. She pressed her palms flat. The skin of her hands was papery, mapped with the calluses of 50 years of communion, the hardened patches on her palm heels where earth and flesh had met 10,000 times. The communion that opened was not the communion she had practiced for 50 years. The boundaries dissolved, not because she pushed, but because the restored system signal made them irrelevant, the way a wall becomes irrelevant when the room it enclosed is demolished. The root lines were not whispering. They were speaking. At a volume and clarity 50 years of cautious practice had never encountered, because the system had never, in her lifetime, been clean. She had spent 5 decades pressing her palms to earth and hearing the world through a filter she did not know was there. And now the filter was gone, and the world was louder and clearer, and more beautiful than anything her training had prepared her to receive. She felt every grove, all 47, not the generalized awareness of surface communion, individual groves, distinct. Each a unique signature, a personality shaped by centuries of communion and geographical circumstance, the way individual voices are distinguishable in a choir. Sunyani was the brightest, Nyariga's grove, the exiled scholar's sanctuary, blazing with the amber intensity of a crystallized node. She felt the crystallized groves, 4 amber beacons, windows where the boundary between deep system and surface had become transparent, letting light through from below. And she felt the depth, below the groves, below the root lines, below the boundary the circle had declared inviolable, the sealed layer. And beyond it, at the limit of her communion, amplified by the clean system's signal strength, she felt them. Not fully, not the way WuDon felt them. The way you feel a presence in a dark room when the lights have gone out and you cannot see but you know with absolute cellular certainty that you are not alone. The Zagele, below, present, alive, patient, waiting for the Tindana to listen. Atinga surfaced, her palms lifted from the earth. Her face was wet, not controlled institutional tears, but the tears of a woman whose 50-year understanding had been demolished and rebuilt in the space of a single communion. Tears running through the deep lines the harmattan had carved in her skin over 7 decades, following the channels of weathering as if her face were landscape, and the tears the first rain of a new season. Her mouth was open. Her hands trembled. She smelled of road dust and sweat, and the mineral tang of deep communion that clung to practitioners, the way smoke clings to a person who has stood beside a fire. "How long?" she asked Samini. Her formal register was gone, stripped away, discarded, the institutional voice replaced by the raw voice of a woman confronting something too large for protocol. "How long have they been there?"
Since before us, since before the circle, since before the tradition we built on their foundation without knowing it existed.
The circle must know.
The circle must change.
Samini's voice was gentle now. The combative edge from the charge reading dissolved, replaced by compassion, the specific compassion of a teacher watching a student encounter a truth that cannot be approached gently. He knew what Atinga was feeling because he had felt it himself, months ago, in the moment his own communion had broken through the boundary. The vertigo, the awe, the grief for all the years spent not knowing.
The prohibition was born from fear, fear of what Nyariga found, but the foundation was never ours. We were always custodians. We forgot what we were custodians of.
Atinga picked up the vessel, held it differently now, not as an instrument of judgment, but as a relic. A beautiful, obsolete artifact of an authority that had been rendered meaningless by the truth beneath her palms. "I will take this back to the circle. Not the charges, the truth, from me, from an elder who spent 30 years voting for every prohibition that kept us from what we should have known."
They will resist.
Some, the ones whose identity depends on being originator rather than inheritor. The ones who would rather the root lines had stayed sick than accept that our tradition is custodial rather than sovereign. Her voice hardened with the determination of a woman who knew exactly which colleagues would fight and which would fold, who had sat across council tables from each of them for decades and knew their fears as intimately as she knew their names. But the root lines are clean. Every Tindana can feel the difference. You cannot prohibit what every practitioner can already feel beneath their palms. She paused, looked at WuDon with an expression that contained assessment and something closer to reverence than an elder's pride would usually permit. "The circle will not change in a season. You have planted a seed in stone. Stone resists, but roots are patient.
Lafi.
WuDon said, peace. The Frafra word spoken not as farewell, but as benediction. The word apoka used to close arguments, to seal forgiveness, to mark the moment when fighting ended and the work of living together resumed. Attinger received the word with a slow nod. Lafi. She turned to leave. She walked from the courtyard carrying the vessel and the bearing of a woman who had come to deliver a judgment and was leaving to deliver a revolution. Her sandals scraped laterite. Her traveling cloth, stiff with road dust, swung with the rhythm of a walk that had covered territories. At the courtyard gate she paused, her hand on the worn wooden post, and looked back at them, master and apprentice, palms on earth, and her face carried the particular expression of a person seeing something for the first time and knowing they will spend the rest of their life trying to understand it. Then she was gone. The courtyard held her absence the way water holds the shape of a stone after the stone is removed. Samini watched the empty gate.
The circle will change, not because it wants to, because the alternative is irrelevance. Institutions do not change because they see the light. They change because they feel the heat.
WuDon did not answer. She was looking at the gate, but her attention was below, down through the laterite, through the root lines, through the boundary to the guardian's steady pulse. But beneath the guardian's warmth, beneath the Zagale's patient maintenance, she felt it again. The pulse from the deep substrate, the one she had felt during Attinga's reckoning. Brief, rhythmic, in a frequency the guardian did not recognize. The guardian had flinched. The vast consciousness encountering something it did not know was there, a tremor in the deep communion, subtle as a crack in glass, the vibration of a being confronting the limits of its own knowledge. The flinch lasted less than a second. The guardian resumed steady maintenance, but the flinch was real. WuDon filed it. Tuesday's communion would investigate. Samini rose, planted his staff in the earth. The ancient petrified wood sank an inch into packed laterite, finding purchase.
I need to prepare for the training sessions. Attinga's reform will require deep communion instructors. The circle has none, we have 2.
2.5. WuDon said. Yariga's communion exceeds mine in raw depth.
Then we have 2.5, better than none. Begin the curriculum tonight.
He walked toward the compound's interior, staff tapping laterite, the sound rhythmic and familiar. The walking music of a Tindana who had spent 40 years moving between groves and would spend the rest moving between students. WuDon stayed, pressed her palms deeper. The courtyard was empty now, just her, the rooster, the tamarind tree's shade, the fading warmth of Attinga's departed authority. The root lines sang clean, the guardian pulsed warm. But beneath the singing, beneath the warmth, beneath the guardian's patience, beneath everything the system was built to monitor, the new pulse echoed. Faint, rhythmic, in a language the system did not speak. She sat alone in the courtyard and listened to the thing beneath the listening. The guardian's warmth above, the unknown voice below, and between them, the Tindana tradition, custodians of a foundation they were only now beginning to understand. A proverb of Apokaz surfaced in her memory, unbidden. The river does not know the mountain it was born on, but the mountain knows every river. The listener filed the proverb beside the unknown pulse and listened,